Sponsorships are synonymous with NASCAR as they are the backbone of a team's season. Even people who don't care at all about NASCAR can easily name several historic partnerships, like Jeff Gordon and DuPont, STP and Richard Petty, Kevin Conway, and Extends.
This is Bob.
But in modern day racing, sponsorship is hard to come by and several drivers have fallen to the wayside due to a lack of sponsorship. It really begs the question in this day and age, can anyone break into the sport of American stock car racing without a large monetary backer? The answer, of course, is no.
Well, that sucks.
But was anything different in 2003? NASCAR Thunder 2004 has a career mode consisting of you, Mr. No-Name Driver, breaking into the Cup Series and building your way to the top of the sport. Over the course of your journey, you will need to build parts, build shop additions, and make repairs to your car almost every week. How do you manage to do that? Sponsorship, of course! What happens when you're the most unmarketable driver of all time? What happens when the infinite money pool dries up and you have to find a way to fend for yourself? Let's find out together. Can you win a championship in NASCAR Thunder 2004 without any sponsors? I decided to play as the one driver in the sport today who is literally incapable of maintaining any sort of sponsorship deals to help with realism and immersion. I also decided to run on legend difficulty for some reason. I chose the number 100, which is coincidentally the number of NASCAR wins Brett Moffitt would have if he could hold down a single sponsorship for more than one race. After building your car, you are brought to this screen where you're told to sign sponsors and pick your crew members. Of course, I skipped signing sponsors and went straight to the crew page. I signed Dick Trickle's brother to be my crew chief and exited the menu ready to begin the challenge. But there was one major problem. Despite me clicking into and exiting the sponsorship signing screen, the game was still not letting me progress. As it turns out, you are required to fill every single sponsor slot before beginning a new career mode. This obviously presented a huge problem, as the entire point of this video is to win a championship without any sponsors. I very quickly came up with a raggedy duct tape solution to this issue and decided to sign sponsors with high expectations and then simulate the first few races of the season. Simulating races in NASCAR Thunder 2004 is essentially you as the player giving up and accepting a last place finish. Since you run so badly when races are simulated, I figured the sponsors would become unhappy quick and leave the team, allowing me to eventually be able to run races unsponsored. Everything was going to plan as my primary sponsor left after Las Vegas, but issues still remained. The associate sponsor still hadn't left after skipping the first 6 races, and all the while I had the sponsor, I was gaining tons of bonus money to be able to put towards upgrades. I decided to give up on this attempt and start over with a new save file. I also came to my senses and put the difficulty to rookie. After signing all the meaningless stuff, we began draining the sponsor happiness. My top 3 sponsors left me in time for Bristol. Unfortunately, I still had the driver and team sponsor, who only exists to give you money every single week, regardless of how the race goes. This means their happiness levels never decrease, and I'm stuck with them for the first 9 races of the year, almost no matter what. I went into the Bristol event, did qualifying, and began the race. I was making steady progress throughout the field, and it took me 2 laps to realize, hang on, why is this event 500 laps? For some inexplicable reason, the new career mode menu defaults you to a 24 race season no matter what prior settings you had been using before. Everything else, however, defaults to the settings of whatever save you had most recently played on, meaning the game defaulted me to 100% race lengths. I took the L and exited the career mode, restarting once again. Attempt number 3 went way smoother than I ever would have expected. I decided to go with the full backmarker aesthetic this time and selected Windcraft for all but one of my sponsor slots, and in true Brett Moffitt fashion, they left the team in record time, completely vacating the car after race 2 at Rockingham. This was incredible news on several levels. For one thing, I had Windcraft as the team sponsor, and when they left on the other parts of my car, they also left that section, meaning I only had one single sponsor left on the car that I'd be stuck with until race 10. This also meant that I had a bigger advantage in points, only having to skip 2 races as opposed to 6 or 7. The road to the championship wasn't going to be smooth, but this was without a doubt my best chance at completing the challenge. I strapped in and got ready for the Las Vegas race. Qualifying for Vegas went really well, as I got a 26th place starting spot. This definitely would have been a qualifying objective had I had any sponsors. I was flying through the field early on, making solid passes, and the car was driving perfectly. Of course, this all changed 5 laps into the run when the car remembered it was 50 in every category and immediately became undrivable. I completely forgot that you have to pit on 5% race length in this game and did not pit under this caution. This allowed the entire field to come down and leave me out to dry for the restart. The car drove like complete AIDS and spun itself again on lap 7. I was finally able to make my stop here, and of course, no one else came down. My pit crew was under no pressure at all, and still had a ridiculously slow stop. There are 3 things that are certain in any NASCAR Thunder 2004 playthrough: logo rivals, Jeff Gordon championships, and Bill Elliott blowing his engine. I restarted in last, because why wouldn't I, and slowly began making up spots. Fun fact! NASCAR Thunder 2004 AI occasionally forgets how racing works and will decide to not pit under caution, even if they already had been coming down right before the caution comes out. This results in them literally running out of gas on the restart and throwing away good runs, sometimes bringing out even more cautions in the process. This is exactly what began happening, and I somehow managed to claw out a top 10 after everything was said and done. It was a tough start to the season, but no one said this challenge was going to be simple.
The 100 car never even got a scratch in this race.
Atlanta was more of the same, and I got 17th in qualifying. I had a horrible start like I do in every race in this game, but started making forward progress. Atlanta is a pretty fun track where you can make the top line in 1 and 2 work occasionally. I paused here to scratch my head, and the pit cycle began on lap 7. Getting down to pit road speed is probably the most unfair part of this entire game. These guys will literally full send at 120 miles an hour into the pit lane and somehow stay under control and manage to slow down to 70 without getting penalized. Most tracks you can't even touch the apron without dying. All the while, these cunts just drive around you like you're sitting still. This was the case entering the pits at Atlanta, where the 8 gained a ton on me and Rudd came out of right field to completely pass me. The pit crew had another terrible stop, and I lost 14 spots total. A good thing about rookie difficulty is that the field always stays packed together at every track, shortening the gap between me and the leader. This allowed me to fight back into the top 10 and finish out the race in 9th. Mark Martin lost in a photo finish to Kevin Harvick, but thankfully this is the only time any such thing has occurred in Martin's career. 9th place was good enough for 63K in race winnings, but coincidentally, 63K is exactly what I'm paying my pit crew every single week. This would mean I would have broken even if not for the team sponsor that I shouldn't have, giving me 10K for just existing. But that's not the only money that I earned from this race. Fun fact! Every single race has a few random cash bonuses for accomplishing a variety of tasks during the weekend. Qualifying on the pole is worth $5,000 every race, for example, and conversely, the driver that gains the most spots from their starting position gets $3K. There is a good chance I will have to fall back on these awards in order to make a profit after any given race. Take the next race at Darlington, for example. I completely blew qualifying and started horribly. But Darlington is famous for checkups on the race start. 2 beautiful checkups on the first lap gave me a ton of spots, and the racing gods blessed me with a 3rd checkup on lap 2 to give me even more spots. By the time lap 3 went on the board, I was already into 8th place. The car was driving great until entering turn 3 on lap 5. At this point, it was as if my tires had suddenly been replaced by giant circular sticks of butter, and the car had negative grip for the rest of the run. I hung on for dear life before hitting pit road on lap 7. 2 races into the season, and the pit crew had delivered 2 horrible pit stops so far. You would think we'd be due for a good stop, right? Well, I foolishly thought the same thing as the gas man was nearly murdered in front of me, and we got a 20.3 second stop. I may as well have sped onto pit road with a stop like that. This naturally left us 21st after running 6 before the stops. I was once again making steady progress through the field until something unusual happened. A caution that I did not cause came out on lap 12. Kevin LePage spun by himself going into turn 1. Kevin LePage then did his best Kevin LePage impression and drove straight into the line of a much faster car, annihilating Christian Fittipaldi for no reason. Thanks to the lack of fire-off speed in this horrible car, I was unable to move up from 8th, and that is where we finished. In good news, we made a profit in this race, and the season was looking like it was gonna be rough, as I was not even leading rookie points after this race. Next up was Bristol, which really put into perspective how far back I would be in points if this is where I would have had to start out my season like in the first attempt. I qualified 14th, but this really wasn't what mattered. Bristol is a very interesting track in NASCAR Thunder 2004 because the way to find success here doesn't have anything to do with qualifying speed, race speed, or really any level of strategy whatsoever. There is in fact one single man who stands alone, one pillar of strength and masculinity that holds the fate of 42 professional stock car drivers in the palm of his hands every single trip to Bristol Motor Speedway. And he is, of course, none other than the man, the myth, the snake wrestling wildlife conservationalist himself, Ward Burton. When the pit cycle begins at Bristol, you just have to stay out as long as possible, no matter what, and observe the end of the front stretch pit lane for a bright yellow car that's sitting at the end. Once Ward exits the pit lane, he will decide your fate. On this occasion, Ward came down pretty early, and while I stayed on the racetrack, the caution flag hit right before the finish line. Ward had decided the caution would indeed be coming out on this day, which trapped most of the fast cars a lap down. If I'd been able to hit the line before the caution, this would have made a much bigger difference and I might have even had a chance to win, but instead I took my pit stop under caution and came out 11th. Despite not having a whole lot to lose, I still drove pretty carefully in the opening laps after this restart. This was one of the most difficult passes on Casey Mears I think I've ever had to pull off in any NASCAR game. I was making solid gains as the run went on, but it quickly became clear I wouldn't have enough time to get to the lead. This didn't stop me from trying, and when the white flag hit, I had second place right in front of me. All I had to do was find a way around Bill Elliott and Hermie Sadler. This was a huge mistake as the car lost all control in the center of the corner and I found myself facing backwards. There are no cautions after the white, so I was stuck in this cursed world of my own creation. I managed to block the track without getting killed and only got a 30 with Jimmy Johnson. The car spun back around and I was back on my merry way as if nothing had happened. This somehow resulted in my best finish thus far in 2003, and to top it all off, Casey Mears finished 7th. The race would end with Kenny Wallace taking home his first career Cup Series win. I had to sit there for a moment to take in the glory of Ward Burton's masterful race manipulation to help his Bill Davis teammate get the win. And to think I said Bobby Labonte was the best teammate a guy can have. Ward's the man! Bristol pays out hardly anything, but I surprisingly made a profit from this race and found myself 18th in points behind Johnny Benson and Ricky Craven. It was still a massive uphill battle. Next up is Texas, which is a joke of a track IRL, but actually one of my favorites in this game. This track has no right to be this much fun, and yet here we are. Despite qualifying 17th, I was making a lot of progress at the start and was into the top 10 quick. Everything was going great until Bill Elliott decided to run out of talent and check up the entire field. This of course resulted in a 60, and I had my first logo rival of the playthrough. This meant I would have to avoid Waltrip for the rest of the race in order to not get killed for no reason. Luckily, I got past him as the incident occurred, and I was able to drive off, still seemingly with a ton of pace. I really did think this was my best shot at a win thus far, but would have to survive pit road first. Now would have been an excellent time for the pit crew to have their first good stop of the season. To my utter shock, they did. and I only lost 7 spots once the cycle was complete. Naturally, Waltrip got out ahead of me, and I had to waste a lap share drafting with him to get him under 60 rival points. Any number under 58 will ensure he will not actively try to wreck me when I go to pass him. When the final 4 or 5 laps came around, the car was struggling to stay on the bottom, but I was still making passes. The car still felt fast, and I had a chance down the backstretch in third with 2 laps to go. The draft is incredibly powerful in this game, but I just kept overdriving both corners. The car refused to turn when it mattered, and I finished third at Texas. Next up was Talladega, which was the best news I had read all week. I thought about skipping qualifying, but ultimately decided to experience the 3-minute lonely drive in full. It was good enough for 29th, and the race began. I was quickly into the top 10, the pit cycle began early on lap 3. I was late on the brakes entering the pit lane on lap 5, but this still may have just been the best pit road entry at Talladega in NASCAR Thunder 2004 history. Thankfully, you can't flat spot your tires in this game, and I took the usual 2-tire strategy. The pit crew still managed to completely fumble the bag, handing me a 15-second 2-tire stop and handing Dale Jarrett a position. Thankfully, the AI do not try at all on pit exit at this track, and I waddled my way back onto the track. I passed everyone who pit on lap 6 and was tracking to take the lead. Dale Jr. almost visited his dad with this late block into turn 3, but I managed to take a lead away, coming to 2 to go. Now all that was left was to do my best Steve Shives impression and block everyone. Things were going well as I fended off the attacks of the overpowered DEI cars until a major problem arose. The caution flew coming into the tri-oval and coming to the white. Chase Montgomery momentarily became a fidget spinner and caused the second natural yellow of the playthrough. This was really bad news because of how poorly my car fires off on restarts. I was incredibly thankful that this era of NASCAR had single-file restarts and the green flag waved on the final lap. I rode a half lane down from the wall on the backstretch to keep Dale from trying to pass low, and going single-file into turn 3 may as well have settled it then. Coming to the line at the same track that may have saved Brett Moffitt's career in real life, virtual 2003 Brett Moffitt came to the line to take his first career Cup Series win. It was not a very satisfying moment for me because I wanted to win at a real racetrack, but it still paid out a ton of very necessary winnings to put towards repairing this ancient equipment. We go from the biggest track in NASCAR to the smallest at Martinsville. I am bad at this track, but still mustered 5th in qualifying. At the start, Elliott Sadler was leading Michael Waltrip. Sadler proved to be a bitch to pass over this run, but I had my own problems to deal with. You're nearly guaranteed to run out of gas on 5% race length at Martinsville, and of course my pit crew was completely worthless, so I needed to gain as big of an advantage on the field as possible before pit stops. This was a 30, and I didn't even hang on to the lead. I put Sadler in the wall on lap 8 with what was officially a clean pass, but Elliott was right back underneath me. If Elliott Sadler drove like this in real life, maybe he wouldn't have retired in the Xfinity Series. At this point, I was just trying to hang on to a dying car and let Elliott scamper off with the lead. Just kidding, I doored him out of turn 2 on lap 12 and finally secured the lead. Unfortunately, this was the lap I would have to pit, meaning I ran out of gas on the exit of turn 2. This cost me a little bit of time, and the pit crew didn't do me any favors either. I came back onto the track in 6th, and Sadler didn't even have the lead. But this was when the caution came out, thankfully after the cycle had completed. This caution was for the other pit road glitch in NASCAR Thunder 2004. I have talked about this glitch on the channel multiple times, but in all my years of playing the game for the channel, I've never caught it on camera. I almost started to believe it was just something I had imagined up, but no. Here is the Martinsville pit road caution glitch in its full glory. In any case, the car didn't drive nearly as good as it had at the start, and I was struggling to make passes. I tried every which way I could think of to get around Labonte, but he just carried way too much speed on exit for me to be able to get on side. He almost drove himself into the barrels coming to the white, but didn't, and I had to settle for third. It was an all-around good race, but unfortunately, it counted for nothing. This was the end of my first day of recording for this channel, and I'd saved the game after Talladega, but not after Martinsville, meaning this race technically didn't even happen. The only reason I'm keeping it in is because of the pit road caution. In the actual canon event, I got the pole, was slow, somehow only managed to get a 30 here, and still lost. Still, second place was my best run of the playthrough thus far. Unfortunately, I had failed to beat Jeff Gordon, which nearly made me rerun the race again. Instead, we moved on to California. If this was the qualify 17th in every race challenge, I would be doing a pretty solid job thus far. I climbed up through the field like usual and was running in the top 10 at lap 6. The car sucked to drive, so I was being careful on the entry to pit road. This is when Jimmy Johnson decided to hit me multiple times on the way in. I am not entirely sure how this was supposed to be my fault, but I was stuck with a logo rival regardless. The pit crew, of course, were not content to stop the bleeding and cost me even more time on the stop. By the time the cycle was over, I was all the way back to 21st. I fought back as hard as I could, but could only get to 10th. I made a whopping $12,000 in profit for this event, and to make matters worse was that I was only up to 11th in points and just over a full race back from the lead. There were still a lot of races to go, but Dale Jr. was already proving to be a huge issue. Next up was Richmond, which is another one of my favorite tracks in this game. The car drives like shit for essentially the entire race, and it's your job to hang on for dear life and not die. It's also one of the easier tracks in the game to qualify at, and I got 6th. This was somehow not any rival points. Robbie Gordon was running second for some reason, and I was fighting for the lead by lap 6. Stability on corner entry is hard to come by at Richmond, so I was giving up a ton of time into turn 3 every lap. Someone was always all over my ass on both ends of the track. I hung on to the inside of Rusty on lap 10 and went to pit. Somehow I did not kill myself on the barrels, and the pit crew delivered their best 4-tire stop of the season. I knew that this had to be the race. We were gonna win on talent. I of course came out 2 seconds behind the actual leader like anywhere else, but the car wasn't driving like it was at the start. It was not easy to drive down 4th place Jeff Burton, but once I got there, I got back in the rhythm and worked myself into second. My heart was actually racing as I got to Gordon's bumper with 2 to go. The car was sliding all over the track and I was barely hanging on. Biffle held up Gordon just enough coming to the white to let me close in. I took the chance to dive bomb turn 1 and slid up into Gordon just a bit. I didn't hit him hard enough to send him up the track though, so I was stuck with him glued to my right rear, which slowed us both down. Biffle flew in from right field to try and get in the way as much as possible, and I just held on out of turn 2. I knew all I needed to do was park the bus at this point, and I had the race won. But even at 89 miles per hour, the car still didn't turn into turn 3, and Gordon pulled off an absolutely masterful bump and run to shoot me up the track with no hope to retaliate. Jeff Gordon beat Brett Moffitt once again. I fucking hate Jeff Gordon. Next up was the All-Star race, which I had gotten locked into from winning Talladega. I actually ran this event because, as it turns out, $1 million would go a long way in this challenge. The random draws started us in 13th, and it took a while for the car to get going, but once it did, it was very fast. The problem with the All-Star race is not the pace of the car, but it's actually twofold. In this first segment, you are forced to complete a 4-tire pit stop under green. This is devastating for us, as a houseplant would be more reliable at servicing a race car than our pit crew. Stunningly, we made the stop with no issues and finished segment 1 in a respectable 7th. Bobby Labonte and Bill Elliott were eliminated, and the next segment began. We had another horrible start, but fought up through the field regardless. On the white, I was right there with them. Down the backstretch, I used lessons learned from Chase for the Cup and baited Earnhardt to the outside. Through turn 4, I had the lead for the first time all night and tried to hold up Earnhardt on exit. I'll admit, I didn't really try too hard here, and Earnhardt still beat me. Why? Well, remember when I said the problem with the All-Star race is twofold? At the end of segment 2, the top 10 can be randomly inverted based on an in-game fan vote. This is of course just a random number generator in the game, but I was hoping that with Dale winning the segment, the quote-unquote fans would vote to keep the running order as it is. This is of course not what happened, and I got the worst draw possible. In the most Brett Moffitt fashion imaginable, the entire top 10 was inverted, meaning I was starting 9th with 5 laps to go. This was pretty tough, as it took me 6 laps to even get into range of the leaders in the last segment. But regardless, I put my head down and did my best. Dale Jr. carved the path forward, and I did what I could to keep up. By the time lap 5 rolled around, it was the exact same situation as in the previous segment, but I just didn't have enough time. Dale Jr. won the All-Star race by 1/10 over Brett Moffitt. This also turned out to be the difference between a payout of $1 million and $15,000. Why do the racing gods hate Brett Moffitt so much?
Hi, this is Kamikaze editing the video to tell you to buy my album! Yeah!
Regardless of the All-Star race, the run we had gave me some confidence for the Coke 600. We started 24th in the same row as Casey, which without a doubt meant this would be a blessed race. I was passing people left and pretty much just left and actually took the lead lap 8. Building a gap and driving off would have been way too much to ask for, of course, and I did not hang on to the lead before pit stops. I came down on lap 10 with what I think was a very respectable drive onto pit lane. Gordon, of course, made up around 6 or 7 car lengths by completely cheating, and the pit crew did what they usually do. I was outside the top 10 yet again after stops, but things were looking up. Cars were staying side by side, and it looked like I was faster than everyone. Coming to the white, I found myself to the inside of Kevin Harvick going for the lead. I pushed him all the way up the track and tried to squeeze him behind me as hard as possible. Going into turn 1, the car once again decided to not find the bottom of the track and instead opened up a perfectly car-sized lane for Dale Jarrett to get in. I tried coming back down the track to cut him off, but all this did was allow Harvick to throttle up on my outside. The situation was simply too stupid and I couldn't cover every base. Jarrett wasn't responding like normal to my squeezing and self-preservation kicked in, and I let him go. I did everything I could to get back by, but it wasn't enough. For the 3rd time in 2003, Brett Moffitt crossed the line in second and did not win the Coke 600. It was incredibly annoying, but the good news is that it was enough to put me in 6th place in points after the 1/3 mark of the year. But, of course, all good news comes with a hastily written addendum edited on at the end 3 hours later. Jeff Gordon was the points leader, and with 3 wins already, I knew he was going to be a problem all season. Race 3 of 2003 was run at Dover. Can you believe I qualified 17th? I'll admit, Dover was the last place I expected to have a good run, and Dover also happens to be one of the only tracks you can make huge gains coming onto the pit lane. Everything I gained was promptly lost by the pit crew, of course, so nothing came of it. The best I could do was 10th, and naturally, Gordon won this race, which lost us even more points. Pocono is another track I've never been good at, but thankfully I had just done the Tony Raines stream for this track, so it was still fresh in my mind. I was good enough for 3rd on the first qualifying lap. This was a 60. Christian Fittipaldi hit me on pit road, and we did not win again. Still, despite not winning all these races, the purse payout for 2nd is actually pretty reasonable. Finishing 2nd every week was giving us a huge bank, and I was actually able to start repairing parts every 2 races instead of every 4 at this point. Michigan was more of the same. We qualified well and had good pace. Craven blew up, and this was a 30. Things were looking incredibly normal until lap 4, when the game threw me another curveball. The man, the myth, the Void spun by himself entering turn 1 and did his best Kevin LePage impression by throwing himself directly into the path of Jerry Nadeau. This caution came at a pretty awkward time, and I had no choice but to pit earlier than I would have liked. The pit crew, of course, decided this would be the week they weren't going to put in any effort, and we went from the lead to 20th. I had to stay sharp though, because without a doubt, some people had stayed out. Once the car got going, it got going! We were passing a lot of fast cars. I made my way around the spooky duo of Dale Jr. and Tony Stewart when Johnson decided that just letting me go by was too much to ask for. This cost me a ton on exit, but would actually come back to help me. Tony and Dale both went to the bottom to pass us both, but the 24 and 88 started their pit road sequence right when this happened. This made all 3 of the AI cars check up and gave me a huge lead coming to the white. It's not how I wanted to win my 2nd race of the season, but it's how it happened. Brett Moffitt got his second win of 2003 at last. It was beginning to look like Brett was only going to be allowed to win at tracks he had won at in real life. But since Infineon was next, I was pretty sure that would change. Infineon in NASCAR Thunder 2004 is my best track in any NASCAR game. I know that's not saying much, but I do love coming here. The first qualifying lap was the pole, but I did a second lap for practice. At the start, I let Mark go just to be safe, and I was working my way around him by the second half of the lap. It was pretty by the numbers from here, but then a thought occurred to me. The likelihood of a pit cycle caution is pretty high at this track, so it was best to pit early in order to avoid losing spots. I pit lap 2 and got normal service. For the first time all season, I did not lose a spot on pit road. Things were looking up, until they weren't. This uphill is one of the best spots on the track to gain time on the AI, but is also probably the easiest spot to wreck. Which is exactly what happened. When the caution was over, it was clear some people hadn't pit. This is an annoying trait of road courses in this game. If a caution comes out in a 5% or 10% race, sometimes the AI will just not pit at all. This is blatantly unfair in every way, but that's just the name of the game in NASCAR Thunder 2004. This can sometimes lead to fun winners, but can you believe that is not what happened here? Of course, Jeff Gordon won this race. This result was so annoying that I almost rage quit the game without saving. Next up was Daytona. I didn't want to waste the fresh parts for this race, but I knew how difficult this race is in Season 1, even with 2 tire strats. So I qualified 25th and existed for a few laps before pitting. It was a typical plate race, and I came to the white with the lead. I was just happy to not see Jeff Gordon up here. Still, I managed to choke this race like I always do for some reason, and Bobby Labonte got the win. Chicagoland was an example of exactly why I wanted the fresh car for this race instead. We qualified 10th and ran fine, but only had enough pace to finish 6th. But thankfully Labonte got another win in this event. I've never seen the AI have a crash in this game like this on pit road before. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a certified Kevin LePage moment. New Hampshire was more of the same as we qualified well, had good speed, wrecked for no reason running 6th, and had to fight for spots late on worn tires. The race came down to me, Newman, and Earnhardt, but as this always goes, the car just did not have enough grip late, and we did not win once again. But all this pain and suffering of not winning was adding up. And for the first time all season, Brett Moffitt took the points lead by 4 over Jeff Gordon. We still had a lot of races to go, however. Could we keep up the pace? It was already time for the second Pocono race, and when I say this went the exact same as the first one, I'm not kidding. Right down to Tony Stewart getting in my way as much as possible and costing me the lead.
Hey, I've seen this one. This is a classic.
This was a 30, and the pit crew decided to finally show up. This was their best pit stop of the season. So naturally, Christian Fittipaldi decided to pit in front of me as slowly as humanly possible at this exact moment. We may as well have had a 20-second stop, and of course, I was back outside the top 20. I had nothing for the rest of the race, and finished 5th. I had so much money at this point, I was happy to overhaul the chassis at 114K. I went into this challenge not even expecting to have 114K at any point in time. As it turns out, the prize money allocation in this game is pretty solid. The real question is how sustainable this would be as you get better and better pit crew members who expect a higher salary and eventually you find yourself paying out 200K per race in crew members. Now that would have been the real challenge. Either way, the next race was at Indianapolis, which is my worst track in this entire game. You'll be just as shocked as I was to find out I got 7th in qualifying. The car actually fired off really well on the start, and I just tiptoed my way safely through the corners, and I found myself in the lead of the race on lap 2. This was the absolute last place I expected to pull away with the lead for the first time all season, but here it was, happening. Fun fact, I've been to this track. On lap 4, the car was starting to struggle and the field was closing. Out of turn 4, I was ready to pit, but the field was even readier. I guess I wasn't far enough to the left, and Labonte looked to the inside. Gordon was right behind him, so I didn't have space to fall in behind him, and the AI get on rails whenever they pit, so I couldn't push him either. Instead, I hit the pit barrels, and in the blink of an eye, I was dead. And so were several other cars. It would have been really funny if it hadn't been for the fact that this had been the best run I've had at Indianapolis in years. Thankfully, this resulted in a last place finish, and it would be Craven that got it, and he would kiss the bricks on this fine August day. The finish was frustrating, but I only fell 79 points behind the leader. I, of course, was thinking back to my no upgrades run and how tough the late part of the season got, so I was not at all excited by this outcome. The reminiscing also left me annoyed by the location of the next race. Watkins Glen. I still remember that fight with Stewart down to the wire. To this day, I have no idea how he got that run out of the final corner. It was a tough defeat, and I was ready for redemption. The first qualifying lap was only good for 16th, but I cleaned it up and got the pole on lap 2. This was probably one of the tiniest laps I've ever run at Watkins Glen. Absolutely no course cutting. I will include this qualifying lap at the end of the video for your viewing pleasure. The most important thing to do in any Watkins Glen race is to make sure you do not get taken 3 wide into the first corner. Ensuring this cost me 3 spots, but I wasn't too concerned. I managed to pull off 2 passes in the final corner on lap 1 and got the lead. People were already pitting, but thankfully the race stayed green and I had a reasonably clean stop on lap 2. Harvick, of course, tried to race me off the pit lane, but it was not an issue in the end. I just drove the rest of the race as if it were qualifying and held the lead for the rest of the event. If Rudd had another lap, he might have caught me, but it didn't matter today. I easily got Brett Moffitt his 3rd win of the season at Watkins Glen. I know what you're thinking, right? This breaks the pattern of me only winning races at tracks Moffitt's actually won at. That is where you are wrong, viewer! Moffitt actually has a K&N East win at this track. Why he was in that race we may never know, but it happened, so the pattern lives. Following that, we were back in Michigan, and 3rd place was the qualifying spot. The race was pretty much identical to the last Michigan race, but this time it went green to the end. This was the first time I discovered that this Mark Martin paint scheme has Tombstone as the sponsor on the back. That's pretty neat. I was battling Jimmy Johnson once again at the white, and you guessed it, the car decided it didn't want to turn when I needed it to the most. This resulted in a 30, and Dale Jarrett was back yet again to be an inconvenience. Into turn 3, the car turned somewhat, but Jarrett decided to throw it to my outside. The exact same thing that happened in the last corner happened again, and Stewart drove around me like nothing. I cannot understate how what you're watching right now is not at all my fault. And Brett Moffitt finished 2nd for the 6th time in 2003. This was an unfortunate finish, as Bristol was the next race, and we all know how well drivers get along with each other at Bristol. Qualifying was good enough for 15th, and this spot gave me perfect intel on Ward Burton. Ward was in a different paint scheme this week, so I had a better idea of what to look for on pit road. Nothing happened until the pit cycle began, and all I could do was wait. A lot of times Ward Burton will Ward Burton will determine that a caution is necessary in the first Bristol race of the year, but not so much the second. Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, let me tell you that the shepherd of all the world's wildlife, Ward Burton, deemed it necessary for a caution in both Bristol races in this playthrough. May his will be done. The caution was at an inconvenient time again though, and we only came out 16th. This was pretty bad because we came out behind a 68 rival Jimmy Johnson. At any other track, we'd be able to draft with Jimmy for a few laps. Damn. At any other track, we'd be able to draft with Jimmy for a few laps and maybe get him down to 58. But Bristol is not the easiest track to share draft at. Jimmy was an absolute brick wall for this entire run, and I literally could not do anything with him. When the checkered flag waved, we were back in 13th. The winner of this race was in fact Jeff Burton. No doubt the best team player in NASCAR, and no doubt the biggest lover of critters in NASCAR. Ward Burton is also the best brother in NASCAR as well. Is there anything this man isn't the best at? Coming down to the final races of 2003, we had a slim lead over Stewart in 2nd. I had a couple of bad tracks coming up too, so we weren't out of the woods yet. Darlington was up next, and I finally managed to put a lap together for 7th. The car had upgrades on the chassis and engine at this point, which helped me hold the lead for most of the event. The pit crew, of course, handed me a terrible stop, and I was once again outside the top 10. It took a lot of work to get back towards the front, but once I didn't have to look back. Brett Moffitt crossed the line for his 4th win of the year, and finally at a track that he hasn't won at in real life. I bet you thought I was doing that on purpose. No, I really have been trying to win every race so far. Shut up. Next up was Richmond, which was great news. I got the pole and lost the lead immediately. It took a few laps to get back to the front, but I was pretty untouchable once I got there. Once lap 10 rolled around, it was time to pit, but cleanly entering pit road at Richmond twice in the same season is obviously way too much to ask for. The caution came out before I got in the pit lane, and we restarted 32nd. Climbing through the field was a wild time. Can I just say how genuinely fun these challenge runs are in Thunder 04? You're never going to run off from the field during this first season, but you're also not running 20th every week. Every race is an actual challenge no matter the track and no matter your skill level. I highly recommend trying this or the no upgrade challenge yourself. Most of the field pit during this run, but the leader did not, and I finished 2nd yet again in this challenge. With 10 races left in the season, Brett Moffitt had 84 points over 2nd place in the standings. New Hampshire was another pole, another terrible pit stop, and another 2nd. I was incapable of qualifying at Dover for some reason, but had pace as the race went on. I found myself 2nd on lap 15, but needed help to make the pass. Out of turn 4, I saw the best chance I had to pass Stewart by catching him behind Stanton Barrett, but Stewart wasn't having any of it. He entered the corner as low as he possibly could, and the classic magnetism happened. Dale Jarrett Arca braked into me, and this, of course, was my fault. It was the perfect trifecta of a 10, 30, and 60 in rapid succession, and Stewart waddled right back past me. Now I was stuck defending against a 58 rival in Jarrett, and Stanton Barrett just laid over for Stewart. But it wasn't over yet! Stewart was patient with Ken Schrader, and I was not. Of course, the car decided to not turn here, and the exact same thing that happened 4 laps earlier happened again. We did not win Dover, and now it was time for Talladega. I did not qualify for this race, and I was very fast. Pit road entry wasn't nearly as intense as last time, but I decided to make things interesting and take 4 tires. I hooked up with Michael Waltrip and made my first logo ally of the playthrough. Considering Moffitt's IRL history with Michael Waltrip, I thought it would be at least somewhat fitting. I had to abandon Michael once we caught people exiting pit road, but he still had more speed than me anyway, so we continued drafting. It was shaping up to be a fun finish before I was hit with a 2 to go caution once again. Kevin LePage self-spun for the 2nd time in this playthrough, and the race may as well have been over then. We had an awful restart, and I could do literally nothing but watch as Sterling Marlin laid over for Jeff Gordon for the win at Talladega. This game sucks. The next race is Kansas. Kansas is probably the least fun track in this entire game. Qualifying was only good for 25th. Nothing about this race was enjoyable. I wish I had something interesting to say here, but I do not. I hung on to finish 9th. Charlotte was almost a throwback to the start of the video, as I qualified 1 spot better than 17th. The same thing that has happened in every mile-and-a-half track so far this entire video happened. As I was driving back through the field, I saw him. The bright yellow legend himself. Ward Burton was going for the win of this race. I did everything I could to help his line out, but as the laps wound down, Ward decided he was not going to win on this day. It was painful to make the pass and let him go, but I knew that if Ward had truly wanted to win this race, he would have made it happen himself. Praise be unto his name. I found myself in 3rd at the white. How original. Rudd gave it all he had in turn 1, and I got into him on the exit. It was shaping up to be another 3-wide move for the win from the guy in 3rd. But I actually had grip for once. It was just enough to stay ahead of Rudd on exit, and I finally won on a mile-and-a-half track in this godforsaken challenge. This was a satisfying win, but unfortunately the camera angles in the post-race of this track are terrible, so I don't have any footage to talk over, meaning that we're going to move on to Martinsville. In qualifying, I got last on the first lap, but first on the last lap. I started this race on an upgraded engine, but I still ran out of fuel in the same spot on lap 13. This of course cost me the win, and I finished second to Jeff Gordon for what felt like the 105th time in this playthrough. I still had the last lap, however, with my 169-point lead going into Atlanta. In the Peach State, I qualified 21st, and it seemed as though the race was going to go the same way as every other mile-and-a-half race so far this season. This was until lap 4, when I bore witness to an absolutely brutal crash into turn 1. Somehow I managed to avoid this incident where I found myself actually screaming IRL whilst playing the game. Jimmy Johnson completely ran out of talent and actually committed murder on the racetrack. If this was a Griff Dog video, Mark Martin would no longer be alive. In fact, the second replay shows a camera so far away that you can imagine the race director definitely believes that there were no survivors in this incident. Regardless, this caution was not in a good enough spot to affect the outcome of the race, and I finished 8th. I really wanted to win Atlanta in this playthrough to be able to make allusions to Michael Waltrip Racing or Moffitt's 2018 win at this track, but that was apparently too much to ask for. This left 3 races to go on the season. After Mark Martin's hard crash, it was announced that Carl Edwards would be relieving the driver duties of the number 6 car for the remainder of the season. Jimmy Johnson was suspended for being a total scrub, and Rick Hendrick made the interesting decision to put Busch Series regular Jason Keller into the 48 for the final 3 races of 2003. Phoenix was an interesting one as the front row consisted of Brett Moffitt and Bill Elliott. I was very fast at Phoenix and took the lead with 4 laps to go. The car drove fine all race, but for whatever reason, whenever I take the lead, the grip level goes down by around 10 points. The race was going to come down to me and Carl Edwards in his first career Cup Series start. I began parking the bus coming to the white, which brought Stewart into the conversation as well. The car went straight into turn 3 and it looked like a replay of every single race I hadn't won so far this season. The car actually came back down the track and it was a drag race between me and Edwards, but the car decided, nah, I'm done turning, immediately on the exit. I hung a hard left because I was sick of losing races like this. I managed to hit Edwards perfectly and he slid back, allowing Brett Moffitt to come to the line to win his 6th race of 2003. It wasn't nearly as satisfying as Moffitt's actual Phoenix win, but I still accepted the outcome. I left Phoenix with a 164-point lead over Stewart with only 2 races left in the year. When I started qualifying, I realized something. This was the first race I've actually run at Wokingham this year.
Otherwise known as the Rock.
If you'll recall, all the way at the beginning, this race was simmed, which is really unfortunate because Rockingham 1 is a super important race in normal Thunder 2004 careers. Anyway, I got the pole despite not deserving it in the slightest, and stuff happened, I guess. The same things that have happened in every other race this season happened and we finished 3rd. But the good news is that something different is finally about to happen. As it turns out, Brett Moffitt had a 225-point lead following Rockingham, which means that Brett Moffitt would be the 2003 champion no matter what happened in the final race at Homestead. I'd been playing this game safe for over 8 hours at this point, so I was happy to say fucking and simulate the final race of the season. Matt Kenseth won at Homestead. Brett Moffitt started 38th and finished 38th, and the season finally came to an end. We ended off the year with 8 poles, 6 wins, 22 top 5s, and 31 top 10s. This season was a bit of a mess, and there wasn't one single driver that ran off with a bunch of good finishes, so the game actually went really easy on me for this challenge. It's definitely one of the easier seasons that I've had in this game altogether. In any case, we were stuck signing a full car's worth of sponsorship at the start of the season no matter what, so I did not win a championship in NASCAR Thunder 2004 without any sponsors, but the total sponsor earnings for the entire season was only $152K. Considering we ended the playthrough with over $400K in the bank, it didn't make that much of a difference in the end. Thinking about it now, I probably should have done this challenge on veteran difficulty, but I'm sick of playing this game, so maybe I'll try that in another 2 years when the next Thunder 2004 challenge video happens. All in all, this was a pretty decent challenge run, and like I said earlier in the video, playing this game with arbitrary handicaps is honestly the most fun way to do it. You're going to struggle for wins even at the easiest tracks, which makes the game actually challenging at times. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more videos like this, there's already a few on the channel if you want to check those out too. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in whatever it is that I do next. Bye!
if you want to start up front, this is the lap that has to be perfect. The final qualifying lap here on the track. He needs to get a good run now if he wants to start up front in the race. Wow, quick lap. That put us on the pole.